I really love hearing something or learning something that really causes me to think hard and to start to shift how I see things and open up new waves of thought and ahas. To me, that's more fun than writing. To me, that's the thing that fuels my writing. That's the thing that fuels conversations like this is just learning. To me, that's the joy. Anything I do in my work is really just to try to share that experience or that process with others.
Hello and welcome to the Beautiful Work Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Krikorian. Each episode, we feature a special guest from all walks of life, and we ask them to explore the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the triumphs and trials of their chosen fields. Writers, musicians, coaches, business owners, athletes, and everything in between. We peel back the curtain to hear their stories, to walk their paths, to find out how they breathe life into their beautiful work. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Beautiful Work Podcast. Have a great interview today with Dr. Benjamin Hardy that we will get to in just 1 second. A couple of real quick announcements. If you guys could or have not already, please subscribe to the podcast on either iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher or wherever you happen to be listening today. Really does help our audience continue to grow, and to please pass this along to anybody that might be interested or is a fan of these type of deep dive produced podcasts. Really do appreciate it. We have a fantastic growing community here, and it's because of you guys continuing to pass these kinds of things along that it is growing so much. So thank you for that, and please make sure to subscribe. On the music front, I also am a full-time musician and released my 5th record last year, and so you can find all my music on dankrikorian.com or beautifulworkpodcast.com. One of the songs from my last record, Lila, is playing behind us in the background right now, and all the songs used in the podcast are the instrumental versions of some of these songs. So please check out iTunes and my website for all that information as well. All right, my guest today, like I mentioned, Dr. Benjamin Hardy is an organizational psychologist and a best-selling author. He's been the #1 writer on Medium.com, featured in Psychology Today, Inc., and read by over 100 million people on sites such as Forbes, Fortune, CNBC, and many, many others. He's got a book that is just coming out right now called Personality Isn't Permanent, a fantastic book looking at personality, how it develops, and how you can continue to develop it. So it's a fantastic read, and we're going to get into that as well. So please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Benjamin Hardy. It's funny you mentioned the Utah Jazz. I mean, I remember that was when I was about 12, 13, 14 when Jordan was making his second run with the Bulls and hitting that jump shot over Russell. Just a devastating jump shot.
I'm glad. I mean, you think someone like John Stockton and Karl Malone.
Yeah.
It would have been nice if they got a championship, but
sure.
I'm a fan of dynasties. I loved Curry and those guys crushing for a while. I like Tom Brady crushing, so I think it's better that Michael Jordan probably got 6,
Yeah.
It's better for history. It's better to think back on and be inspired by than, if they lost that one. It'd been weird if they had lost the last dance. I mean, think about that.
Yeah, that's true. I think you would frame his career and how you look at him so much differently.
You'd remember things differently.
Yeah. And then he has that interesting, couple years where he played baseball. He just walked away from the game and came back, and Michael Jordan's an interesting.
Steve Kerr thinks it was just because he was too burned out on the persona of being Michael Jordan. He just needed a break. I mean, he said that obviously the death of his dad was pivotal, but Kerr's perspective was Michael just needed a break from being Michael Jordan for a minute.
I can see him on that. I mean, the world watching you every second, every move. Yeah, really interesting. Well, let's pivot a little bit and start talking about writing and your career and your book coming out. And you know, you've got so much to talk about. So I want to start though with asking you about your dedication section of your new book, which you dedicated to your wife, and you wrote a nice little note to her about, you know, not giving up on you, or you know, when it didn't make
Mm.
sense to keep. Where does that come from, if you don't mind me asking about that first section with your
Yeah, I
wife?
mean, it actually connects with the intro of the book where I talk about, my wife almost didn't marry me because of a personality test.
Yeah.
My wife had prior been married before she married me, and she got married to more of what would be considered like a safe bet. It ended up becoming a mess, but like she married the son of a very prestigious professor. And he was going straight into a PhD program, following in his father's footsteps. And it was like a really stable family. And it was just like, it was the smart decision, honestly, like on paper from her perspective, getting married. Guy ended up having a lot of addictions and being very abusive. And for 3 years, she ended up like getting destroyed in that situation and having to get out and having to like recreate herself. But when we dated, my whole future was totally up in the air. Like, I mean, this was like when I was like 23, 24 years old. I really had huge dreams and aspirations, wanted to be like a
Uh-huh.
writer and things like that. This was before I knew about things like building an audience, and like I had no clue. And I wasn't even really exactly sure what that would look like. I was like not sure if I was going to like be a religious professor. I didn't know if I was going to like write like business books. I had no clue. And so like when she married me, it was very much a leap of faith, from her perspective. It was like when she got married the first time, it was like the future was all laid out. They were going to go live in China. He was going to be a professor of accounting. Like it was, whereas for me, it was like, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but like I got huge faith that great stuff's going to happen. And I know that it's going to work out. Like, and then like,
Right.
like that's not really like a good sales letter. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
um, and so she had to really bet on me. And, even when I first started writing pretty heavily, which was in 2015 during the first year of my PhD program. And we had to make some good investments as graduate students, like buying a website, starting to buy mentoring and education, to help me become a better writer, and even further investing into big mastermind groups and things like that. I mean, I've made some huge risks. Some
Yeah.
of them have worked out great and others haven't. And she's kind of like let me do a lot of that stuff. I was a believer that things would obviously lead to the goals, even though there was uncertainty behind every investment or every decision. I'm still not exactly where I want to be and still carving the path, but I've obviously made a lot of progress and we're in a pretty dang great situation right now. And so I just kind of wanted to just tell her thanks for betting on me when it was a huge leap of faith.
Yeah. It was touching, and I know, I have such a supportive wife as well with all the endeavors and things that I do, and it's so important having that backbone. Maybe we could start with you a few years back. I think you said 2014, 15, started to write on medium.com, and that whole story of starting to write there, and then how that developed into what it is that you're doing now.
Yeah, Medium was an interesting opportunity. I didn't really know about it. I'd heard about it for the first time, like right around that time, 14, 15. Didn't really think that it was going to be this thing that propelled my career forward. I remember actually thinking about it now, like the first time I ever logged in and just thinking like, what the heck is this thing?
Yeah.
But it was at that point, and this was the first year of my PhD program. This was right when we first got our 3 kids as foster kids. There was just a lot changing in my life. And I think when you're in a state of transition, you have a really good opportunity to make some good desirable adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
And I had wanted to be an author. I'd had that in my mind and even had been telling people about that for quite a few years, since a church mission I served. And when I got home in 2010, I had been going to school studying psychology, but really wanting to be a writer of some form or fashion, like really saw myself writing books, but just never had done anything about it too much. Was very busy with school and kind of just checking the boxes to kind of move myself like towards some of the bigger goals, but wanting to start pulling in the writing side, because it was really the writing that I really wanted to do, but I was kind of checking some of the boxes that I felt important to check off, getting into college and like getting married, etc. But yeah, it was around this time when it just felt like it was really important to start. Like I was just like, honestly, like I need to really start on this writing side ASAP. Like that's what I was feeling at that time. And I didn't know that Medium was going to be a vehicle for that. I was just like, I really need to start. That was what I was feeling. I was feeling that pressure and that
Yeah.
feeling. And so I then kind of started to actively pursue it. Like in the book Personalities and Permanent, I talk a lot about the research now on like the science of your future self. A lot of great research at UCLA and Harvard on this topic. Great stuff on like how it's essential to have a future self in order to engage in deliberate practice and like meaningful decision making. And so I was really like, I want to be, an author. I want to have books. I want to be like at the big publishers. I wanted to definitely be like a traditionally published author. Like that's what I wanted. And a lot of people would question that goal. A lot of people say, just why don't you just self-publish? I just want to be a traditionally published author. That was what I wanted. Maybe that was because I came from the academic background and I cared about stuff like that. I don't really know. But yeah, I then started investing very heavily into that goal. I remember asking my wife if we could buy BenjaminHardy.com. It was $800. She was like, "Are you serious about this? Is this something you're really serious about? I mean, you've been saying you've been wanting to be a writer for a few years. Ever since I've known you, like, should we really spend $800 on this website?
Sure.
Like, let's do it." Spent $200 on an online course by John Morrow. Taught me how to write viral headlines, structure my articles, pitch my articles to places like Huffington Post and Forbes. And I just really started studying the articles that were working. Like I started studying the stuff that was going viral. And I obviously wanted to write my stuff in my own tone and in my own way, but I wanted to know what worked. I didn't want to just write to write. I'm very much like a very goal-focused person. And so I wanted my process to be productive, not just do something to do it. I wanted it to be deliberate practice. And so, yeah, I was just really committed, and I asked a lot of questions. I asked a lot of people like Jeff Goins, Seth Godin, others, a lot of people who I just thought these guys are kind of in the direction I want to go. And I would ask them, like, if I want to get to this destination, what do I need? And after asking a lot of people, the destination was, if you want a 6-figure book deal, you need to have 100,000 email subscribers. And that was like a tangible thing I could wrap my head around. I had no clue how I'd do it, but it allowed me then to figure out how to get there. And so over the next few years, I just started blogging like crazy and learning how to write it in a way that it would be read, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's a skill to be developed. I mean, speaking of Michael Jordan, there's been a lot of conversation about Michael Jordan these days because of his documentary.
Yep.
And one of the debates that people have is like, if Michael Jordan was playing today, would his game be different? I think like the answer is obviously yes.
Yeah.
Like this is one of the reasons why I think personality is it's contextual, right? And people who are really focused on goals, they don't just stick with one method. Like Michael would have obviously been way good at 3-pointers if he played today. And so I like that conversation because we don't just assume that Michael was one way. We assume that he was so committed to his goals that he would adjust whatever he was doing to achieve the goal. And to me, that was kind of how I approach things. Is I'm not committed to one way of doing things. I'm just committed to a goal. And so I'll figure out how to adjust what I'm doing to achieve the goal. That's why I like the quote, when the why is strong enough, you'll figure out how.
Right.
So that's kind of, I mean, ultimately to really break it down simply, I mean, I blogged for like 3 years, probably wrote 200 or 300 articles. A lot of them were hits, a lot of them were duds. But ultimately, I was able to learn how to get email subscribers and eventually get a book deal. And it became Willpower Doesn't Work. And now just continuing to move forward and hopefully write better books in the future.
Well, that's great. And I've really enjoyed going through Personality Isn't Permanent. And I'd like to start coming into some of your thoughts on personality and change and things that you write about in the book, because I think it's just a fascinating topic in itself. And I think some of the claims and things that you talk about, I think you even mentioned in some of your material that are somewhat controversial because of how prevalent personality tests are and how much people love taking them online, and you can spend a few bucks and it can kind of tell you who you are. And so I think
they're huge and they're huge in corporate world too. You know what
yeah.
I mean, they're assumed to be the way to go.
So maybe we could start there with you. Kind of, what was your sort of definition or working definition of what personality is that you use to kind of shape the book around, or a model that you might have used?
Yeah, I mean, I've come to so many different ways of looking at personality, but the general initial view of it that guided me was 2 concepts. One is, personality is like your consistent attitudes and behavior over
Yeah.
time, like how you respond to situations consistently. So like that was the most basic definition that I had. The other concept from psychology that guided my thinking, which I didn't like, but it's a doctrine of psychology, is that the best way to predict a person's future behavior is by looking at their past behavior. That was something I heard over and over. And obviously that resonates with the idea that personality is consistent over time. That, if you want to see how a person's going to respond to various situations, just look at how they responded in the past. And so that was kind of my conflict that I wanted to deal with, was if I'm someone who's seeking change, I don't want my past to be the thing predicting my future. I want my future to be the thing predicting my present. And I want to change. If I want to change, therefore I can't be continually repeating the past.
Right.
And so I think that there's aspects of personality that are important. Preferences, what you prefer, what you prioritize. And I think that, as I talk about pretty heavily in the book, preferences change over time, and they change through experiences and they change through choices. I think the other kind of final thought that I've really come to is that personality is a really clear reflection of your comfort zone. I kind of put those two things together, that anything outside of your comfort zone is probably viewed as outside of your personality. And so to do something outside your comfort zone is probably going to be acting outside the way you typically do things.
Okay.
And so, those are, I think, ways that I describe it and how I view it to some degree.
Okay. Yeah, and I found myself, as I'm reading through your book and kind of reflecting back, as we all do, to how it relates to us, right? Which is, you do a great job, because, I'm thinking about, okay, well, how does this relate back to me? And um, outside of being a basketball coach and professor, I'm also a full-time touring musician, and I have
Wow.
a band of, thank you, and I'm a band of 7 people, and on stage in front of people is not something that, if someone knew me as a little kid, say 12 or 13 years old, quiet, shy, reserved, I played sports and was on teams and all that, but people will see me now maybe on stage and say, like, I would never in a million years think that you would be someone that could entertain and do all that sort of stuff. And I myself have to say, I'm surprised too, because it wasn't a natural thing that I would just wanted to do as a kid. I didn't want to be out in front of people, really. And to be honest, sometimes to this day, I'm still not like most comfortable doing it, but I can do it. And so when you talk about developing over time and your personality changing, or your
I'm wondering
skills.
what was the transition you had to make in order to do it, though. I mean, you had to probably decide in your mind that this is someone you are. You're a musician, and this is what musicians do. Or I'm interested in kind of the mental
Yeah.
transition, or the identity transition, or whatever you did to ultimately allow that side of you to come out.
Yeah, and maybe this is something you can analyze me off of off camera, but there was a time in my life where, because growing up, I was also a college basketball player, and my identity was kind of an athlete, and athletes kind of have a certain persona, or they
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 totally
act a
do.
certain way, and I would say I had a large part of me that was a part of that, and I still probably to this day do. I mean, still being in athletics heavily and coaching as my profession, but I'm also now a musician, and I think when I was making the transition to doing both in my life, there was a lot of struggle with, like, do I want my buddies to come watch me sing some, folk acoustic love songs on stage, and what are they going to think of me? And
Totally.
there was a tough transition, for sure. And at a certain point, I just did it. I just went to an open mic night, sang in front of people, and then from there I was like, okay, well, maybe
To me,
this,
that was probably a defining moment for you, because it like really
yeah,
opened you up. I mean, to me, that's huge. I
yeah,
mean, those are the types of experiences. I call that a peak experience in the book. But I mean, to me, that's like, that just shatters a lot of the things that would stop you from moving forward. I mean,
sure,
to me, that obviously took huge courage, right? It was semi out of character.
yep,
But it was really, I mean, I love that. I mean, to me, that's huge. Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of just the idea that we often regret we live lives of regret because we're afraid of doing what we really want, and instead we're just trying to live up to the expectations of those around us. We're trying
Sure.
to just fit the persona that we have, or the things that being who people expect us to be, even if that's not necessarily who we want to be anymore. Maybe that was like what made sense 5 years ago, but now we're still kind of stuck in that role and in those
Sure.
norms, but like, so I mean, that's freaking awesome, dude. I love that story.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate it. Well, I don't want to take up any more about my story because I'm interviewing
I know.
you.
I just wanted to hear,
But you're being a good listener, so thanks. But what your book makes me do is think about those experiences and kind of your theory of how personalities change and develop over time. Makes me think about that because for myself, I mean, I've changed so much since when I was a kid, and like you mentioned, your future self and where we will go. One of the questions I had for you is, how about someone like, I would say that I tend to be more on the introverted side of that
Sure.
spectrum. How
It's a great
much?
way to say it.
Thank you. But there's situations where like I have to be very extroverted. Like I'm a college basketball coach. I have to get in front of my players every day in the gym and talk. I have to go in the locker room and give a speech before a game. I have to be out and talking to fans and people.
Totally.
Which in that case I'm very extroverted. So what would you say though about changing over time? Like someone that's maybe younger, more naturally introverted like I was, how can that change, or how much does that change as we get older and go through experiences?
I think it changes for everyone. Kind of how they say it with the big five, which is what, it sounds like you're describing. They've got this big five factors of personality, and we're all kind of somewhere on it, although in different situations, we're going to be in totally different spots. But I think over time, what they say is that all of them revert to the mean. You know what I mean? So over time, if you're extremely extroverted or introverted, by the time you're like in your 80s, you're probably gonna be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
um, that's a natural progression. I think that when you have a designed future self and you've got specific goals, then you're going to choose which way you want to go based on the goal. And I think that level of intentionality and focus on who you're striving to be, I don't think that it's the norm that people are radically intentional about their future self. And so their personality doesn't get shaped as focused as they want it to be. I think one of the things that you're saying also that's really important though is that although maybe introversion or just being by yourself and in your head may be a comfort zone to some degree in various roles that you're in because they matter to you, there's also this huge side where you're willing to do other things. I think that shows a lot of dynamics in your personality, whereas I think others who overly define themselves one way, they won't put themselves in the situations where other sides of themselves can be developed. To me, it's all about development. To me, it's
Yeah.
like you can develop the ability to become great in leadership situations, in social situations. And so there's aspects of you that become radically overdeveloped and aspects of you that become radically underdeveloped because you have overly defined yourself one way and you become rigid to that way of seeing yourself, and you become non-flexible to being in different roles or in different situations. And so for me, your story and what you've just described tells me you're in different roles that allow development of you in different ways and learning in different ways rather than being so rigid. I mean, to me, that's a flexible way of living, and that's how I think more learning and opportunities come.
Okay. So would you say like your introversion extroversion scale, or maybe some like what people would consider like traits of your personality, are more like levers on a volume where depending on the context can be more or less, um, as opposed to just it's this is what it is and it's always going to be this way.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think that this is one of the major faults of common views of personality and even personality tests where you get a singular label, is that the focus is purely on content and it ignores 100% context. From a psychological perspective, context shapes content. And so context matters way more than content, and it provides meaning and perspective to that content. And so for me, yes, in certain situations, the dial is going to be up in other ways, and like, and so yeah, for me, it's not just linear. It's not just one metric where it's like in every situation you're going to exactly be the same way you scored on your test.
Sure.
And so in some situations, it's going to go up, and others it's going to go down. And, if you're intentional, you can guide the situations that can pull the things out of you that you want. Admittedly, like if you're someone who wants to grow, you actually are putting yourself in situations where your weaknesses are radically exposed so that they can then be changed. Like and willpower doesn't work, just as an example. Like I talk about putting yourself around people who are where you want to be. Like there's a really good book actually called The Art of Learning. I don't know if you've heard of that one, by Josh Waitzkin.
I have not read that one.
It's a great book, but what he
Okay.
talks about, he was a chess prodigy. Then he went on to become like world class at Brazilian jiu-jitsu and Tai Chi. But one of the things he talks about is a concept called investing in failure. And basically he talked about how like during open training sessions, like where they were doing like jiu-jitsu or whatever, like when there was not an instructional period of time, like they were just given free training, people would often join forces to practice with people at their own level or even slightly below, because they didn't want to like lose, right? But what he would do, Josh, because he really wanted to learn, was he would invest in failure. He would go and partner with people who were like 5 skill levels above him. And like he would get the crap kicked out of him.
Yep.
Like, but like because of like his brain neurons and stuff like that, like his mirror neurons, like he became a lot more adaptive quicker, because he'd get hit in the face and he'd have to the next time figure out why that happened. And so his skill development and his adaptability and flexibility and expanded dramatically because he was putting himself in situations that exposed his weaknesses.
Sure.
And so I think that when you're someone who's interested in growth, you actually put yourself in situations that are against your tendencies, against your traits, so that those things can fade out a little bit and become more flexible.
Perfect.
I think traits over traits can actually become a problem.
Okay.
If they're not,
And maybe that's like a segue into some of the things that you've said about personality tests, and maybe why they're so popular, because people like to see, oh, this is who I am, and it's kind of like fun to have something describe you. But let's dive into that a little bit, because I think it's really fascinating, and like you've mentioned, they're so popular. It's a huge business, personality tests. And so from your point of view, what is the issue with them? You've mentioned a little bit, and then where do we go from here with all of that stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I will be the last person to claim I have all the answers as far as what's the future of all this. I do know that personality tests, the more popular ones, are not good science. I was told over and over by my professors that, and actually in learning the science of how tests work and about how science works, I now kind of can see it from their perspective. Still not as good of a scientist as a lot of my professors, but I can kind of, to some degree, see why these tests are things you shouldn't take seriously. I actually just took a personality test today, and in just taking the test, I realized this is a bad tool for studying what it claims to study, and that's really, like a test needs to actually do what it purports to do. It needs to validly and reliably study what it says it's doing. And I got a totally bogus score. I told my wife about my score today on this test, and she's like, "You're not that." And I'm like, well, I answered it according to what it told me to say. It told me to answer the questions as if I was a child, and I'm like, maybe my parents need to answer this question for me, because I can't answer it in an accurate way. And so there's a lot of confusion as to why people answer the tests the way they do. There's a lot of research about how people will answer the tests differently based on the circumstances around them. There's a lot at play as far as why you get the score you get. And there's a lot of questions as far as, is this the right score? And as far as the test I took today, I took the test called the color code, which is the one I talk about in the book, that almost like literally led my wife to not marrying me. And, that test only frames people in 4 different ways. Like it's a very small way of defining people. It's like either you're a type A person, or you're super relationship based, or you're introspective, or you're a total introvert. Like those are the 4 categories that you can fit into. I think that these tests overly define people. Like one of the things that surprised me while I was writing this book, but it makes a lot of sense, is that there's not really such thing as a personality type. Like to me, that's a really, it's a non-contextual way of looking at people. And so I would say the big problem, aside from the fact that these tests are not good science, is they create a lot of problems with people's identity. In the book, I explain all of Daniel Gilbert's research on identity and about how it works. And identity and personality are two different things, but I think they're very, very connected. Yep. Identity is how you define yourself. Personality is typically how you show up. And basically, what's important about Dr. Gilbert's research, and I would point everyone to his TED Talk, The Psychology of Your Future Self, 6 minutes long, very worth watching. But he basically helps people realize that they're not the same person they were in the past. Like, he asks people, are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Almost everyone says, no, I'm not the exact same person I was 10 years ago. If you're someone who's really growing, you've probably changed a lot. Like, I love the quote from Elaine Day Button. He says, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you didn't learn enough. And so, like, people can easily see that they're not the exact same person. They've got different preferences, priorities, goals than their former self. If you also really think about it, your future self could and should be a different person than you are today. And for decision-making and for practice and for goals, it's really important to say your future self is not who you are today. They're going to make different decisions than you, better decisions. And so if your future self is different from who you are, and if your former self is different from who you are, then who you are today is just a snapshot. And who knows what that snapshot is, but it's something you shouldn't overly define, and it's not something that you should hold so tight to. In these tests, really, and when you've really created a label for yourself, you become very definitive about who you think you are. And that creates a confirmation bias where you're just trying to confirm your label. Everything you do, and even how you explain yourself. In psychology, we call it identity narrative, how you define yourself. You're overly defining yourself based on your label rather than defining yourself based on the person you want to become. And so your label and your definition of yourself literally stops you from growing. It stops you from even seeking growth. And instead, you're just trying to confirm who you are today. And so it really is a fixed mindset. I mean, and so it's the opposite of a growth mindset. And to me, if you study anyone who's really done a lot with their life, what's interesting about this way of looking at people is that because you've created categories, you think that various people are just special or different. And that's literally how Carol Dweck talks about the fixed mindset. People, if you think someone else is special because they've got various characteristics and attributes and that you could never be like them, that is the definition of a fixed mindset. Like, the people who become really good at what they do, they don't view themselves as special. They view themselves as ordinary. And they've worked to become who they've become. They weren't born special. Like, if you view yourself or others as special, you have a fixed mindset. And so it's focusing on who you want to become that matters.
In The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald writes, "Personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures." Personality tests have become a multi-billion-dollar business over the past decades. Tests such as the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator have been used by Fortune 500 companies, universities, coaches, and at self-improvement retreats and seminars to help people gain an insight into who they are and also who they might be working with. I myself have taken the test and at the time found some comfort in the 4-letter personality type I was given. But as we know, nothing is that black or white. And as Ben contends in his new book, Personality Isn't Permanent, your personality and identity are a much more nuanced, contextual, and moldable thing than a 4-letter code from a self-scored test. And there is a bit more hope and freedom in Ben's view on personality. The thought that we have the ability to strengthen and work on parts of ourselves and our personality does open doors and put the ball in our court when it comes to self-improvement. The opponents of tests such as the Myers-Briggs contend that it is unscientific and too self-limiting. Giving folks a 4-letter type that accurately describes their unique personality does seem a bit ambitious. But if these tests are used as one tool towards understanding mixed in with an array of other self-reflection and discovery techniques, I do see its merits as well. But personality remains a complex and intriguing subject. As E.H. Chapin wrote, "Man is concentric. You have to take fold after fold off of him before you get to the center of his personality. You must get below his animal nature, habits, customs, affections, daily life, and sometimes go away down into the heart of the man before you know what is really in him. But when you get into the last core of these concentric rings of personality, you find a sense of the infinite, a consciousness of immortality, linked to something higher and better." Let's take the Myers-Briggs, which is one of the famous ones and the big ones. And I told you before that
It's a heavy hitter.
Part of my leadership masters, there was 1 or 2 classes where we actually all took it. You know, we got books on it. It kind of came in, and we had this kind of self-discovery portion of it. And I'll play devil's advocate here for a second, so you can kind of like bounce ideas off of me. So do you think that the Myers-Briggs and things like those tests, it's more of the construct of the actual unscientific test itself that is problematic, or the way that people use the results that could be problematic? Because, so like, let's say myself, I use the results as kind of like okay, this isn't really all me, but it's interesting, and I'm going to use it to kind of try to better myself, as opposed to, like you mentioned, some people say, okay, this is who I am, I'm not going to grow from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, no, there's no such thing as a perfect tool. I'm a freaking fan of journaling, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
like, I will say from a scientific perspective, they are bad science, but I'm less worried about that. I'm way more worried about what it does to people's psychology,
Okay.
what it does to their identity. I mean, I would ask you,
Yeah.
in going through that test and in reflecting on your score and on the insights that you got, like, how did that actually change anything for you? What did it lead you to do differently as a result? And how is your future either different or better because you have all this fresh insight?
What I think, and I'll go back to when I did this within my master's courses, I think what was maybe a little bit better than what some people might do is, like, some people will just go online, find the test, type in their answers, and boom, this is who I am. I think that the professor and people that came in that did it, they did tell us, like, hey, this is not going to say 100% who you are. Like, we journaled as well. We did discussions about certain things. So it was like just a kind of a piece of figuring out who we are and where we were going, and it just kind of gave some context. So I think that was maybe better than, say, just take an online test and getting it spit back to you and, hey, this is who I am. So what did it change? I think the one thing what I enjoyed about it at the time is, you know, and I have these like books that I pulled out for our conversation to go back through to kind of like A and B certain things. And there's sections about, like, you know, this personality type, what could potentially be like stressors or things that, you know, maybe you're uncomfortable with or whatever. And sometimes maybe just having, when I was going through it, saying, okay, you know, I can see that, gave a little bit of knowledge for me going forward of, okay, well then how do I get better and change in those situations?
Kind of can show you some blind spots that you might not have been already aware of.
The blind spots, exactly. That's the perfect word for it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think that if that's the case, you know, where you're like, look, it's, you know, in thinking about what it's just given me, it's quite true that in these situations, I'm more prone to get thrown off, or I'm more prone to get triggered.
Right.
And so then you can be more aware of that in the future. I recently read Man's Search for Meaning. Have you gone through that book?
Is that's
Viktor
Victor?
Frankl.
Yes, I love that book.
It's it's important. I would reread it in light of this conversation. It's
Uh-huh.
shocking. It's interesting. I mean, he's very convicted about how, obviously in certain situations you can't control the situation, but all of us control how we respond to the situation.
Right.
That is where freedom exists, and that ultimately how you respond to the situations of your life determine the person you become. And it really, from his perspective and from mine, it really is a matter of choice. The person I am today, the person you're having a conversation with, one view of it is that this is just the personality of Benjamin Hardy. You know what I mean? Like, this
Yeah.
is just my personality, and that this was just who I am, and like, this is who I was born to be, or that, and I'm of the choice, thinking back on my past and on the decisions I've made, that I've chosen very strategically to become the person I am. Uh, and that I'm still not the person I ultimately want to be. But even me and you having this conversation was based on decisions I made, and and that, you know and so I just think it's just interesting when you really go back and study
Yeah.
people who have gone through hard experiences. And I'm not saying the people who developed Myers-Briggs did not go through hard experiences, but I think that by overly categorizing yourself, in a lot of ways you're insulating yourself to the realities of life. You're trying to insulate yourself, I mean, to put yourself into such a tight box, and then to try to maneuver your way around life so that you don't get that box too heavily dented up or changed.
Yeah.
I just feel like that's such a limiting way of living.
Sure.
And as for myself, I would say that my personality changed enormously after going through the foster care system. I mean, even getting a PhD, going on a mission, doing a lot of things that I've done,
Sure.
but particularly recently, becoming a foster parent of 3 kids, going through the 3-year process of going through court, getting just slammed by terrible attorneys and telling us we're horrible people for wanting to adopt these kids for 3 years, spending all of our money.
Wow.
And ultimately, we had to exhibit a lot of faith personally. One of the interesting things that Frankl talks about, honestly, is that the moment that people in the concentration camps lost a sight of their future, they died. Um, from Frankl's perspective and from mine, meaning and purpose come through pursuing goals. And so you can't actually have a meaningful present if you don't have a sense of a future. When you lose hope and you lose a future, your life becomes quite meaningless and you have no sense of identity. And from the people in the concentration camps, they lost themselves.
Sure.
This is why I really emphasize the future self being fundamentally more important than the current self.
Okay.
It really allows you to respond to situations intentionally based on who you want to become, versus just, this is who I am, this is how I respond to situations. I'm an introvert, so I'm not going to do anything here. It's like, it makes you be mindful and intentional about how to act versus what's comfortable in the moment. It requires responsibility. And I think the responsibility approach to personality kind of puts it into your hands, which I think tests like Myers-Briggs potentially can support.
Yeah.
But I think that there's still a writing narrative that's implicit in those tests, that you are a certain way, and you might as well just go with that. I mean, even Myers-Briggs, I mean, the people who develop the test believe people are hardwired at birth, and that rather than adjusting themselves to circumstances, people should just cater to who they are. If you're someone who's naturally a little bit angry, the people around you should just adjust to that fact, because that's who you are. And we shouldn't try to force you to adjust that reality.
Yeah. Okay. Really interesting stuff. How about like major sports organizations or major companies that I'm thinking of, like the NFL draft, and they give a lot of these high draft picks. They put them through personality tests because they want to see, hey, is this quarterback, does he have the right makeup for us to invest millions and millions of dollars into?
They're
How
looking
about
for certain things, clearly.
So how about that? Like, how about giving personality tests, or how, if maybe that's not the right way to go with it, how would someone in a decision-making position that has to narrow down a field of a lot of people go about potentially doing that?
These tests that you're describing are not the same
Okay.
as a Myers-Briggs
It's like the
test.
Wonderlic.
I doubt that they're giving Myers-Briggs. I think what they're testing is measures of confidence, measures of resiliency. Like they're testing like how much this person can handle
Mm-hmm.
stress or like dealing with challenging situations. I mean, they are not saying they're not looking for an INTJ or a blue or a green. They're not looking for that. Like they're literally they're probably there are good measures. I mean, you can test someone's self-efficacy. You can study someone's grit. I mean, those are the things that they're looking for. This is a very different way of looking at a person than tests like Myers-Briggs. I mean, I guarantee they're looking for like, how does this person handle stressful situations? You know what I mean? Like there's batteries and tests and stuff you can take to get some pretty good information on like where people are at in a given moment. Obviously, those things are not perfect, but I mean, I could see why they would want to see that. I mean, they have a lot of, I'm guessing that those scores aren't fully a determining factor given that someone's going to take Joe Burrow anyways. And I think that I can see Joe Burrow's personality pretty well without giving him a test. I know that the dude has gone through a lot of challenge. He went from Ohio State down to Louis. I mean, I think we know a lot about Joe Burrow. We've listened to his interviews. He's freaking confident as heck. We know he's going to work hard wherever he goes. We know he's super committed to a future and super committed to winning. So I'm like, how much is a personality test going to determine the Bengals and if they're going to take him or not? I mean, it'd be interesting. What if he said on his personality test that he's not confident? And that, would he ever say that first off? But like,
Right.
what if he said he's bad with people?
Right.
Like, I mean, is that going to change their decision?
Yeah. With him, probably not.
Maybe someone with a little bit more like, this guy's amazing, but we don't, in some situations, personality really can get in the way. I'm not saying personality doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I mean, Dennis Rodman had a pretty extreme personality, but the Bulls still took
Right.
it, right? And like, he had a really good leader,
right?
Phil Jackson, and like he was still committed to growing, and so his personality, as extreme as it was, didn't get in the way of the team, And there's more to Dennis Rodman than the freaking makeup and stuff. I mean, he was pretty introverted, but he was super committed to winning, And so like, but sometimes personality can be so extreme that like I'm thinking Odell Beckham Jr. Like sometimes your personality is so far off that it's like, dude, you can't be on our team. Like as good as you are, your personality is totally in the way. I think that Odell Beckham Jr. could change. And I believe that eventually he'll have to go through some maturity so that he can change. I think Michael Jordan's personality changed. I think he really did learn to become more of a team-focused player. Even though he's the icon, I think he changed how he decided things and saw things over time. And I think you can see that development. And I think that if you're wanting increased results as a team or as a person or as an organization, you have to adjust aspects of yourself because your current personality is keeping you at a certain level. And if you want a higher level, you've got to almost change big aspects of how you do things.
Yeah. And man, you bring up so many great points. And I know I don't want to take up your whole morning with this conversation, but I could talk to you for a long time with all this stuff. But how about as a coach? So, myself being in charge of 18 to 22, 23-year-old kids all the time. And they come in from different backgrounds with different personalities. And one of the things is you want them to change. How about like within groups and, how important is the leader of a group in being able to change potentially someone's personality and habits within a team setting?
I mean, I think it's important, obviously, for each individual to be seen as an individual. But I think helping a player to see where they're getting in their own way. And I think that's what leadership often is. It's like, first off, creating a standard that's like, and helping them determine their own self-directed goal. But it's like, look, if you want to be this type of player, like you probably need to practice harder. Like you need to, I think the coach is to help them see, first off, clarify who they want to be, and then giving them the guidance and direction to say, like, these are aspects where you're going to have to make adjustments to your game or to how you relate to your team. I mean, I think the coach can be an amazing guide to helping the player move forward. I mean, I've had so many great coaches. I mean, I love coaching. I believe in coaching. I mean, I know that right now, if I want to get to where I need to go, I need a lot of coaching to get there because there's aspects of either my mindset that are limited. there's aspects of just my bad habits or tendencies. I mean, I have a great coach, for example, the guy who edited Personality Isn't Permanent, he also edited Who Not How, which is coming out in October. He's such a better writer than I am. He's 10 years older than me. He's just so much, he understands even psychology in many ways better than me. And so even though he's not a psychologist, I mean, he just really understands obstacles and things like that. And he can point out to me like my own areas where, like, even as a writer, I get in my own way, or even just how I think about things that are getting in my way. I mean, from his perspective, just as an example, the title Personality Isn't Permanent, from his perspective, isn't a great title. Like, I think it's going to do well, but he's helped me understand why I was kind of incorrect in thinking that way about framing that book. And he's like, dude, like, the book probably could have been better if you framed it this way.
Interesting.
And I'm like, and I'm thinking about it and listening, and I'm like, I can either just choose to disregard what he's saying, or I can listen and be like, if I want to get better at this, he's probably right. And you don't always have to listen to the coach,
right,
or at least take everything they say. But I think if you're not getting coaching, you're not getting better.
Sure.
And listening about Michael Jordan, I think there's something really crucial about what everyone's saying about him, is that when he came into the NBA, and I think Michael Jordan's someone good to talk about because he's someone who became so brilliant at what he did, is that when he came into the NBA, he was a horrible shooter. When he left the NBA, he was one of the best shooters.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, he developed that game. It wasn't what he came with. And so, like, a lot of people say you should ignore your weaknesses and focus on your strengths. And I think that that's kind of a common way of looking at personality. But if you have goals, you have to deal with your weaknesses, because if you have big goals, those weaknesses are literally going to be the things that stop you. You've got to turn your weaknesses into strengths. And so I think the over focus on ignore your weaknesses and just focus on that will not get you very far in the long game. If you have to get better with people, as an example, if you want to be an entrepreneur, or like, right, you have to get. And so I just think if you look at Michael Jordan, and if you look at how people talk about him, they all talk about how he would have transformed any aspect of himself in his game to achieve his goal. And I think that was my ultimate objective of this book, is that I think that how most people frame personality, people's goals become the byproduct of their personality. They set goals to enforce and to confirm their current personality. In my opinion, personality should be the byproduct of goals. And that we can make adjustments to ourselves. And I think we should decide who we want to be and what we want to accomplish, and we should become that person. That's my take.
Well, I want to get you out of here if you have a couple of seconds on two quick
let's do it. Yeah, I'd love it.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it, man. So, I'm loving this conversation, dude. I love talking. I mean, it's cool. You've got this huge background in leadership. You're a sports fan. You're a coach. I mean, this is great.
I appreciate that. Well, kind of a couple of questions that I like to ask all the guests on this podcast at the end. And you can answer this however you see fit. But the first one is, what's one of the best investments that you've made in your career?
Yeah. So many. I'm such a believer in this. I believe in investing at the level of your future self. And I did a lot of study about financial investment and how that's required to shift your identity. So, I mean, I believe in it so much. I already noted a few of the investments that I made in my writing career, as far as buying a website, an online course. I paid Ryan Holiday a couple $1,000 to help me write my book proposal that ended up becoming Willpower Doesn't Work. That was a great investment. And if I hadn't made
those that might not know Ryan is very well-known, well-established writer on Stoicism.
He's a big writer, and he and I are good friends, and I've helped him a lot. He's helped me a lot, but I paid him $3,000, honestly, and no one could get him for that much now, but this was back in like 2016. I got his help writing my book proposal. If I hadn't paid him the $3,000, I wouldn't have made a lot of money on that book proposal, because I think you can get so much out of it. I'm making a lot more investments these days in employees. Like, okay. I've got like more and more people working for me and supporting me. But I think the biggest investment that I continue to make, and this may sound strange, I talk about it in the book actually, is in charitable donations to causes that I believe in. Like this is a different type of donation or different type of investment, Because I mean, I invest a lot into my skills, into my network. But it's weird. Like obviously I've already mentioned a spiritual / religious person. So like I look at relationships in one of two ways. Either it's a transactional relationship or it's a transformational relationship.
Hmm.
Transactional relationships are very much like the goal is to not change. Like you meet each other at a certain place, and if the relationship starts to require that you change, the relationship ends. You get what you need from the relationship, and that's what it's for. And if it stops giving you what you need, you're out. Whereas transformational relationships are goal oriented, but also it's the idea that the whole becomes different from the sum of the parts. And so the relationship itself can transform you through the relationship where your goals actually start to change because of the relationship. Uh, and how I approach my relationship with God is that I seek it as a transformational relationship, not transactional. But a lot of people, for example, the notion of tithing is done in a transactional way where they'll pay 10% of what they've made. I'm a fan of donating 10% of what you want to make, creating a
Hmm.
transformational mindset where it's like, and obviously this is kind of more of a spiritual conversation, but it's something that's literally, from my perspective, led me to having a 7-figure income,
Yeah.
is approaching charitable giving from a transformational perspective. There's a really good book called Thou Shalt Prosper. It's not even Christian. It's actually a Jewish book on Jewish principles of money. But one of the things he emphasizes, and I've seen this over and over, is that when you give money away to causes you believe in or to people in need, it transforms your subconscious around money. I talk about it actually in Personalities and Permanent. But I was thinking about it yesterday while I was running. There's a few investments I made in that,
Hmm.
a few times when I'd give away a couple $1,000s that were hard back then, that meant more than me giving away $100,000 today. Giving away 1,000, those were big investments. They were scary. That really increased my commitment to the direction I was going. And I think that that's the key to investment, is that investment increases your commitment to where you're going. It really proves to yourself that you're serious about this and you're going to put things on the line for it.
Okay, that's great. It's a great answer. Just interesting throughout the course of this podcast, getting a chance to talk to folks like yourself who just so thoughtful in their investments. And, when they start thinking about it, there's really so many things, obviously, that you've invested in. But, so many have come back to, people or relationships or giving of themselves in some way that's really, propelled them someplace higher. Some people have invested in a great guitar or something that has been great, but for the most part, it's been great answers like that. So thank you. Well, the last one I have for you is what part of your work, the things that you do, brings you the most joy and meaning in your life?
No, it's good. It's good. It's interesting
Sorry.
because it's like a lot of it's not that pleasurable. I mean, I love conversations like this. I will say writing Personality isn't permanent, and even all the books I've written have been hell to write. Um, Enjoyable and satisfying to like really crystallize and get good, but just painful process to go through. The opposite of doing things that are easy. Um, so I mean, I really am getting a lot out of Frankl, and right now, really listening to that book, it's going to definitely guide the next book I
Uh-huh.
write. But I don't define joy or happiness as kind of the definition of enjoyment, where it's like I feel good all the time. I think that that's kind of a misview of it. Like I definitely consider joy and happiness to be often in the midst of deep difficulty and sometimes pain and frustration. But where there is purpose and meaning to it. And so I think that for me, a lot of it has to do with, first off, watching myself change. Like if I reread Willpower Doesn't Work versus what I've just read, I'm like, I can see a huge gap. Like I'm definitely a different writer and a different thinker, and hopefully a better thinker than I was 2 or 3 years ago. And hopefully in the future, when I look at willpower or when I look at Personality Isn't Permanent, I can see, wow, I realized that I wasn't thinking that clearly about certain things. So hopefully my future, and so I think that that aspect of my work is really great because I can see clearly my own progression. Like I can reread my old blog posts and be like, freak, I would never say that today.
Uh-huh.
So I think that that aspect of creative work is really nice, that you can watch your own progression and evolution. For me, I think the most satisfying thing is learning personally. I really love hearing something or learning something that really causes me to think hard and to start to shift how I see things and open up new waves of thought and ahas. To me, that's more fun than writing. To me, that's the thing that fuels my writing. That's the thing that fuels conversations like this is just learning. To me, that's the joy. Anything I do in my work is really just to try to share that experience or that process with others.
Thank you guys so much for listening to the Beautiful Work podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or Spotify and pass this along to someone you like or don't like, whatever you want to do. But we appreciate it. So until next time, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, keep making that beautiful work. See you soon.